Burning sky over the Pacific. They say war changes a man, but what they don't tell you is that sometimes it's not the battle or the blood that sticks with you. It's the silence right before the chaos. The way the sun hits the wing of a B-29 before the first zero appears. The smell of hot metal and sweat in the fuselage. The quiet, measured breath you take when you know the next one might be your last. My name's Robert Kane. Friends call me Bob back then. I was a flight engineer on a B-29 Superfortress, biggest, loudest bird I'd ever flown in. She was called Liberty Bell, but don't let the name fool you. There was nothing delicate about her. In June of 1945, we were stationed on Tinian, a tiny speck in the Pacific that became the launching pad for hell. Our target, a manufacturing plant near Fukuoka, Kyushu, one of the last major industrial zones still running on the southern end of Japan. We lifted off before dawn, engines roaring like thunder, wings slicing the morning sky. From altitude, the Pacific looked calm, endless. But all we could think about was what waited on the other side. I remember gripping the edge of the engineer's panel, watching the dials twitch. 4 massive Wright R3000 engines, each one a beast we had to keep tame, or she'd buck like a devil mid-air. The bombing run itself wasn't the worst part. The flak was thin over Kyushu that day, just light puffs in the distance, the kind that lull you into a false sense of safety. We dropped our payload clean. No heroics, no cheers, just cold, calculated release. A couple hundred feet of strategic devastation, then we banked east, back toward open ocean. That's when the zeros came. No warning, no chatter on the radio. Just a flash of white and red out of the sun, and the unmistakable rattle of gunfire tearing through aluminum. We were still climbing when the first rounds hit the port wing. One engine took a direct hit. Number 2. Flames spilled out like someone cracked open a barrel of kerosene and tossed a match. The cabin went red, not from the fire, but from the panic. Everything inside my gut twisted, not because of the heat, but because I saw the look on the pilot's face. Will Skipper Maddox. He didn't flinch, didn't scream, just stared at the flames and said one thing, calm as a preacher, dump the bombs. Except we already had. Secondary load, he meant the reserve charges. Emergency ordnance we kept for opportunity targets. We dropped them fast, watched as they disappeared into the blue. Then Skipper made the call that would define the rest of our lives. We weren't heading back to Tinian. No way we'd make it over that stretch with one engine down and a leaking fuel tank. We'd try for a carrier group we knew was operating somewhere east of Okinawa. It sounded insane. A B-29 trying to reach a moving speck in the Pacific, flying wounded, bleeding fuel, with the tail of a zero still swinging around. But there wasn't a single man in that plane who argued. We turned her east and flew low. Real low. Barely 500 feet above the water. At that altitude, the ocean looked close enough to touch. We were heavy on one side, favoring the right wing. I had to manually shut off fuel lines to number 2, then reroute whatever we had left to the outer engines. Inside, everything was smoke, sweat, and prayers. Guys were mumbling under their breath. Some named, some just sounds. Our tail gunner Frankie was quiet. Too quiet. I looked back and saw blood on his collar. Shrapnel had gotten him. Not bad, but enough to take him out of commission. Skipper said nothing, but his knuckles went white around the yoke. That's when I realized we weren't flying anymore. We were falling with style. For the next hour, we were playing chicken with gravity. Every 20 minutes, I had to swap tanks manually. The fuel gauge was a liar, always had been, and now it was just mocking us. One of the other crew, Reed, our navigator, kept looking at his charts like they owed him answers. But the ocean doesn't follow rules. Then the cloud bank rolled in. Thick, gray, the kind that makes you feel like you're flying through wet wool. Instruments started going twitchy. The altimeter danced like it was drunk. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, and the temperature inside fell hard. Not from altitude, but from that creeping thought in all our minds. We might not make it. Suddenly, the intercom crackled. Sparks, our radio guy, had caught something. The USN call sign, distant but real. We were near something, someone. A heartbeat in the void. We all leaned in, clinging to that static-filled hope. The carrier was east-southeast, heading slow due to damaged gear. But it was there. Real. Within reach. Or so we thought. That was the moment we saw the second Zero. Out of nowhere. A straggler. Just one. But sometimes one is all it takes. He came in low, fast, from the starboard side. We couldn't turn fast enough. The dorsal guns lit up, tracers slicing through cloud, but he was dancing through them like a ghost. I saw his nose tilt, his guns line up, and that terrible second when you know it's coming. I threw myself against the panel, rerouting fuel again, yelling into the mic. We banked left hard, nearly scraped the water. And then nothing. The Zero pulled up at the last second. Not because we scared him off. He ran out of rounds. Or maybe out of time. He vanished. Just like that. And we were alone again. Only now we were leaking worse than ever. One last engine was coughing. We had minutes. Maybe less. But Spark still had the carrier. Somewhere ahead, still moving. Still waiting. And we had a choice. Try to make it. Or ditch. And the Pacific doesn't forgive second guesses. There's a kind of silence that only happens when men have made peace with dying. It's not loud. It doesn't come with tears or dramatic speeches. It's the way someone exhales and doesn't bother to inhale again right away. It's the 1,000-yard stare of a tail gunner who's lost too much blood to care anymore. It's the quiet creak of metal stretching against wind and gravity, the rhythmic groan of an engine that's forgotten how to trust itself. We were all in that silence when Skipper finally said it, not over the intercom, not with panic, but with that same grounded tone he used when asking someone to pass the coffee back at Tinian. We're going down. The decision came not like thunder, but like the slow drift of a feather finding its final place. There was no hero's theme, no rallying cry, just a dozen exhausted, smoke-coated men accepting the inevitability that even the toughest bird doesn't fly forever. We were just past the Ryukyu Trench, somewhere west of Okinawa, though exact bearings were already useless. The carrier was close, we knew that. Sparks kept barking positions, trying to triangulate using half-dead equipment, but the sea and sky had started to look the same, and even Reed had stopped pretending he could see patterns in the madness. Fuel was not just low, it was done. The last functional tank had given its last breath to engine number 4, and the propeller was starting to spin slower than the others. I could feel the drag, feel it like a giant hand pulling us backward even as the nose stayed forward. The horizon was still stubbornly empty. We had altitude, but not enough. We had time, but not the kind that saves you, just the kind that stretches your last moments a little longer. I turned from the engineer's panel and caught a glimpse of Mick, our bombardier, sitting cross-legged like a man at peace with his gods. His eyes were open, but he wasn't really seeing anything. Just processing, maybe remembering his farm back in Iowa, or the way the sun sets behind cornfields in July. I envied that look. I was still too angry to be calm. Angry at the Zeros, at the orders, at the war itself. Angry at how many perfect birds like ours had gone down in flames or water or silence. When the ocean finally appeared through the cockpit window, it didn't look merciful. It looked endless. Hungry. Deep in a way that mocked the sky above it. The skipper's voice came back on, clear but low, brace for ditching. Keep it clean. Keep it tight. We land her like a queen, or we don't land at all. He wasn't wrong. A B-29 doesn't like water. She's not built to float. Her belly is too broad, too eager to split open. But Skipper had flown her smoother than any man I knew. If anyone could kiss the Pacific without letting her bite, it was him. We dumped everything not bolted down. Ammo, equipment. Even the tail guns got stripped. I remember tossing a toolbox out the hatch and thinking how absurd it was, saving weight now, as if a few more pounds would make the ocean blink. We secured what we could, strapped in where it mattered, and took our places. The cabin filled with the smell of salt and burning oil. I looked up one last time at the instrument panel and watched every needle drop into the red. And then we hit. It wasn't loud like you'd expect. More of a crushing thump followed by a sound like 1,000 panes of glass shattering beneath steel. The wings dipped and the nose plunged. For one terrible second, it felt like we were flipping, tail over nose, spiraling into the dark below. But Skipper, God bless him, held her level long enough to scrape instead of plunge. Water exploded through the seams, knocked my headset clean off. I couldn't hear anything except my own pulse pounding in my ears. The plane groaned like something alive. Metal screamed, rivets popped, the right wing cracked at the joint, and the tail twisted like it was trying to break free. But somehow, miraculously, we didn't sink right away. We skidded across the water's surface, bouncing like a skipping stone, until we came to a violent, jerking stop that flung half the crew forward into the bulkhead. I blacked out for what must have been 5 or 10 seconds. Maybe more. When I came to, everything was blue. Blue light, blue sky, blue ocean outside the busted fuselage, and silence again, but not the peaceful kind. This was the kind that comes after a bomb drops, when you're waiting to find out if you're still alive. Somewhere to my left, I heard coughing. Then a voice. Then another. It was Frankie, somehow still breathing, dragging himself through the narrow corridor. I unbuckled, wincing as a bolt of pain screamed through my side, and made my way toward the rear hatch. There was water pouring in now. Steady. Oh, I see, like it had been waiting for us. Skipper was still at the controls, slumped but breathing. Sparks had a gash on his forehead and blood in his eyes, but he was already pulling out the emergency raft pack. Reed, God, that poor kid, was just standing there, arms limp, eyes wide. It took everything we had to get the hatch open. Once we did, the Pacific roared in like an old enemy finally getting its revenge. We shoved the rafts out, one by one, and started dragging the crew. Some had to be pushed. Some had to be carried. Mick had a broken leg but kept cracking jokes the whole time, like we were just on a rough fishing trip. Frankie coughed up blood and salt water, laughing through his pain, muttering something about making it home in time for the Brooklyn Dodgers season. Skipper was the last one out. Typical. Stubborn. Proud. We had to yell at him to let go of the bird. The Liberty Bell didn't sink right away. She floated just long enough for us to get clear. Then, as if on cue, the nose dipped and she slipped beneath the waves without ceremony. No explosion. No glory. Just a slow fade into darkness. And then it was us. 12 men in a raft meant for 8. Drifting. Bleeding. Freezing. Watching the sky burn orange as the sun began to set over the vast, uncaring sea. We were alive. But for how long? That question hung in the air like the smell of engine oil that still clung to my hands. And none of us said what we were all thinking. What if the Zeros came back? Or worse, what if no one came at all? The night over the Pacific has a way of stripping a man down to the very bones of who he is. Out there, under a sky swollen with stars and silence, there are no distractions, no orders barked over radios, no roaring engines to drown out your thoughts. Just the steady lap of salt water against rubber and the kind of stillness that makes time feel like a knife pressed gently against your throat. We drifted like ghosts, a dozen figures hunched together in silence, our breath fogging in the cooling air, limbs heavy, stomachs empty, hearts somewhere between terror and exhaustion. Nobody spoke much. What was there to say? We had made it out of the plane, yes, but that didn't feel like survival yet. It felt more like intermission, like the sea was giving us a moment to reflect before it decided what to do with us. The rafts creaked under our weight, and I could hear the occasional cough or groan from the others. Frankie had stopped laughing and was now curled into himself, face pale, hands trembling from more than just the cold. Mick was slipping in and out of consciousness, mumbling the names of people none of us knew. Maybe family. Maybe ghosts. Reed was the one who kept us tethered to hope, in his own quiet way. He clutched the flare gun like it was a sacred relic, his other hand gripping the crumpled map he'd stuffed into his flight jacket. The thing was useless now, soggy, unreadable, but he held it anyway, like just having it near made our chances better. Sparks kept fiddling with the emergency radio, tapping and tuning and rewiring like a madman, though we all knew the odds of reaching anyone out here were slim. He didn't care. It gave him purpose, something to fight the creeping dread that otherwise crept in during those long stretches of nothing. The sea stretched out in every direction, moonlight shimmering off its surface like scattered silver. We saw shapes in the waves, sometimes dolphins, sometimes debris, sometimes just the tricks the mind plays when you stared at too much ocean and not enough certainty. My eyes kept drifting to the horizon, searching for the dark line of a ship, the glint of metal, the blinking promise of rescue. I kept remembering the coordinates Sparks had called out before the ditch, replaying them like a mantra, convincing myself we had landed close enough for the Navy to find us. But the truth was, we didn't know if they had even heard us. We didn't know if they were even still there. The hours dragged. Some men slept or tried to. Most of us stayed awake, not out of choice, but because our minds wouldn't let us drift. Every now and then we'd hear something, distant engines, maybe, or the faint roar of wind across water, and we'd sit up straining our ears, hoping it was a plane, a ship, anything that meant salvation. But every time, it was just wind, or our imagination, or the sea mocking us for believing. Eventually, the sun began to rise again, bleeding orange across the horizon like fire creeping through the edge of the world. It was beautiful in that cruel way nature often is, glorious, indifferent, too grand to care about the specks of men fighting for life beneath it. I watched the light slowly fill the faces of the men around me, revealing the bruises, the dried blood, the empty eyes. We were still here, still breathing, still clinging to rubber and fading strength. That was when we saw the shark. At first, it was just a fin slicing clean through the water, maybe 20 yards off the port side of the raft. Long, steady, almost graceful. Then another, and another. I don't know how many. Enough to remind us we weren't alone out there. No one panicked, not openly. But the tension that settled over the raft was sharp, tangible. Every hand gripped tighter to rope, every eye fixed on water. We knew the protocol. No sudden movements, keep limbs inside, stay calm. But protocol feels like a bad joke when you're bleeding into open water with your boots half submerged and a creature the length of a jeep gliding silently below. Skipper kept us calm. That man had a way of speaking that could convince you a storm was just a breeze and that death was just another checkpoint to fly through. He sat up, voice low, steady, and told us what we needed to hear. Not that we were safe, but that we were seen. He reminded us of the calls Sparks had gotten through. Reminded us that ships patrol these waters daily, that we weren't forgotten. Even if he didn't believe it, we did. Or wanted to. The sharks stayed with us for hours. Sometimes we could see their dark shapes moving just beneath the surface, following us like shadows with teeth. Nobody talked. Nobody moved more than they had to. We just drifted, waiting, sweating despite the cool air, our legs cramping, eyes red from staring too hard for too long. A couple of times, the bigger one would bump the raft, just lightly, just enough to let us know it could. Each time, I felt my heart catch like it had snagged on a wire. We were not in control anymore. Not of the raft, not of our bodies, not even of our fear. It was mid-morning when we saw the speck on the horizon. At first, none of us dared speak it. We didn't want to curse it, didn't want to wake ourselves from what could have been just another trick of desperation. But the speck grew. It shimmered, dark against the sunlit waves. Then it split, became shapes, towers, antennae. A ship? We erupted almost all at once, yelling, waving, flares bursting into the sky with sputtering red light. Sparks sobbed openly, clutching the radio like it had done the job all by itself. Reed stood up too fast, nearly toppling the raft. I grabbed him by the collar and pulled him back down just as the sea surged up under us. The destroyer cut through the water like a blade, bearing down on us fast and loud and impossibly real. We could see figures on the deck, shouting, pointing. A lifeboat was already swinging out. The sound of engines, real engines, filled the air like a symphony, and for the first time in what felt like years, I believed we might actually get out of this. As the lifeboat neared, I looked around at the others, my brothers in fire, smoke, and salt. We were filthy. We were broken. But we were here, still alive, still fighting, still waiting for the final page to turn. They pulled us out of the water like men being hauled back from the edge of the world. There was no ceremony, no bugles or flags, just strong arms and hoarse voices, the scrape of boots against steel decks, and the blessed, searing warmth of sunlight that suddenly didn't feel like an enemy anymore. One by one, we were lifted aboard the destroyer USS Colquhoun, a Cleveland-class silhouette we had only ever seen from above, and for the first time since we'd taken off from Tinian, the solid thud of real ground beneath my boots made me want to weep. Not because we were saved, though that mattered, but because for the first time in days, I was standing on something that didn't feel like it might vanish under me at any second. They wrapped us in blankets, poured hot coffee into our shaking hands, and spoke to us with a tone that was part admiration, part disbelief. The corpsman who checked my ribs told me I was lucky to be breathing. I told him I'd only ever been lucky once in my life, and it was the day Skipper decided to fly with me. He didn't laugh, maybe because I didn't say it like a joke. Mick was laid out on a stretcher, legs splinted, face pale but alive. Frankie had regained enough strength to flirt with the nurse, and Reed, bless him, was still clutching that useless, soggy map like it had brought us home by sheer will. Sparks never let go of the radio, even when they tried to take it from him. I think he thought if he did, it might stop working again, or maybe that it would all turn out to be a dream and we'd wake up back on the ocean, still waiting. The skipper of the Colhoun, a square-jawed man with eyes like tempered steel, came to speak with our own skipper not long after. They talked low out of earshot, but I saw the moment when the conversation shifted, when our skipper's shoulders finally sagged just enough to admit he didn't have to hold the whole world up anymore. He nodded, shook the man's hand, and walked back to us with the ghost of a grin. We were going home. Not tomorrow, not clean or whole, but we were going. And in the language of war, that was everything. I remember that night on the ship, lying in a proper bunk for the first time in weeks, the hum of engines under me like a lullaby, the dim red lights glowing soft and strange across the ceiling. I couldn't sleep, not really. My body was still caught somewhere between exhaustion and vigilance, like it didn't trust peace yet. I lay there staring up, replaying the mission in my head, not just the firefight, not just the burning engine or the cold sea, but the little things. The moment Skipper touched the yoke with both hands and took the weight of 12 men on his shoulders. The way Frankie grinned even when the flames got close. The way Sparks made that damn radio sing, even when it shouldn't have. I remember the sound of the ocean slapping against the raft, the sharks, the slow, creeping sunrise, and the way we all looked when we realized we'd made it. The war wasn't over. Not yet. But for us, that chapter was closed. Our bird was gone, Liberty Bell, proud and fire-forged, now resting somewhere deep beneath the Pacific, a monument to every plane that had flown hard and fallen harder. And even though we'd walked away from her, none of us left her behind. She came with us in the creak of the deck under our feet, in the wind that caught the edge of our jackets, in the way we didn't have to speak to understand each other anymore. Weeks later, after we'd been debriefed and processed, they gave us papers, ribbons, and a few vague promises about furlough. We stood in formation, tried to look sharp despite the new scars and worn-down boots. Someone said something about valor and survival. I don't remember the words. What I remember is Skipper placing a hand on my shoulder as we walked off the base that final day, the sun setting low behind us, casting long shadows on the tarmac. He didn't say anything, and he didn't need to. Some of the boys went home and never looked back. Frankie opened a diner in Queens. Sparks got hired by Bell Labs and spent the next 30 years trying to talk to satellites instead of rescue ships. Reed became a schoolteacher and taught kids how to read the sky. Mick didn't make it through the winter. Infection took what the crash did. But he made it far enough to ride home, to see his family, to laugh a little more. That's something. Me? I still wake up sometimes with salt in my throat and the roar of an engine that isn't there anymore. I kept flying for a while. Couldn't stay away from the sky. But eventually I found peace in quieter places, under hoods of cars, fixing things that could be fixed, building things that stayed built. I never told many people this story, not the full version. Not because I didn't want to, but because it never came out right. Not until now. There's something about that fire in the sky, something about the way it looked as it bled into the horizon, that stayed with me all these years. The hollow, burning sky, like a warning or a promise or a question that never quite got answered. You asked me what it meant, what it was all for. I don't know that I can give you a clean answer. I know that we flew into hell and made it out with our souls mostly intact. I know that we were brothers, not by blood, but by the way we held each other up when gravity and fate tried to bring us down. I know that somewhere out there, a part of me is still drifting over the Pacific, chasing the echo of propellers, looking for a signal that says you made it. And I know this, that day above the Japanese archipelago, we may have lost the mission, but we saved something bigger than a target or a map. We saved each other. We flew on one wing, on one prayer, on the last fumes of belief. And when the fire came, we didn't let it have us. We gave it the sky, but not our lives. Not that day.